So if you missed my workshop, I had a free workshop the last 2 Sundays. And one of the activities that we did in this workshop was going through a mentor text. Now, a mentor text is not what you have to do as someone who's writing, but a mentor text is just a sample of writing so that you as a writer or potential writer can decide, maybe I want to model my writing like this, or maybe I want my writing to look like this. So a couple things, content warning, especially if you're listening to this on a playback, I will be talking about my story, which it does include addiction and death and suicidal ideation. So giving you that heads up for full transparency. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, like I said, this was a part of the workshop that I did because I am hosting a 6-week class that you can sign up for at bottomlesstosober.com. So if this is something that you want to work on with your own writing and with your own story, sign up for this work because it's going to be an awesome 6 weeks. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and I'll start reading through the story that I wrote, which, like I said, this story, it got me on Red Table Talk, NPR, CBS Evening News, and has really opened the opportunity for me to reach a lot of people and just be really vulnerable and really powerful with my story. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and I'll start. So this is called My Darkest Secret, a Kentucky Teacher of the Year's story of addiction and recovery. And this was published on December 3rd of 2020. And just a reminder, my sobriety date is November 28th of 2020. So I didn't even have a week without a drink by the time I wrote this. And I decided to come out and tell everybody what I was dealing with. How would you like it if I outed you right now to everyone on Twitter? Maybe I should go ahead and do that. At the time, a friend threatened in the middle of an argument to out me to the public. They threatened me with telling the world what my darkest, most painful secret was. My name is Jessica, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'll pause right there. So one of the things that we talked about in the workshop was leading and how you start a written piece. And essentially, one of the writing strategies that I teach is making sure that either you are starting with a quote, starting with action, or starting with inner thoughts. So in my case, I started literally by quoting the friend who threatened to out me to everybody on their Twitter feed about my secret alcohol addiction, because at that time, nobody knew what was going on. And also another key thing that I brought up in the workshop was, notice I just said this friend, notice that I said they. I did not specify who this person was or really give away any details about them, because this person is a well-known enough figure where if I were to publicly put that in that article, that would have been really damaging to them. And again, if this process is about writing for healing, there's no healing that would have come from me doing harm by like putting somebody's business out there, right? So when we're writing our stories, we're writing from our perspective. We're not in the business of telling everything that other people did. We're in the business of telling how we experience the world and our feelings and our learning process of that. So I was not going to put out what he said in social media and in the newspaper, right? So just to start, it said, how would I like it if I outed you right now to everyone on Twitter? Maybe I should go ahead and do that. At the time, a friend threatened in the middle of an argument to out me to the public. They threatened me with telling the world what my darkest, most painful secret was. My name is Jessica, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. For years, I struggled to balance my life with my addiction. To cope with guilt, I worked diligently to be the best teacher, the best employee, the best at everything, because it helped me sleep at night. I spent years at happy hours counting others' drinks so I could pretend to drink like a normal person while aching to go home to isolate and imbibe. So as you notice, some of the things that I'm starting to do, I'm starting to include details of what I was struggling with, right? So as you listen, what I want you to think about is, what would I be comfortable with sharing with regard to my story, whether or not you're in recovery? And what are things that I'm not comfortable with sharing with regard to my story? But if you're thinking about what you're uncomfortable with sharing, I also want you to really think about why not? Like, is this fear? Is this like a legitimate reason why you can't talk about these things? So I want you to kind of think about that as you listen. Like, what am I comfortable with sharing and what am I not comfortable with sharing, and why not? So I'll continue. I hid my disease from everyone possible. The very idea of someone telling my story without my consent was terrifying. The fear was crippling. What would others think of me? Would I lose my job? Would my students and their families turn their backs on me? My family and friends? What about my mother? She'd always been so proud of me. My sister and I are her American dream. I'm a first-generation American. I grew up in one of Brooklyn's roughest neighborhoods, excelled academically, and later became a nationally recognized educator as the 2019 Kentucky State Teacher of the Year. What would my mother say? What would she say if I was outed? I'm not the first in my family to struggle with addiction, though I am the first to be in recovery. My mother's disdain for those relatives' choices was always evident. Some have died, some live in unfortunate living circumstances. Would she use the same language that she used to describe them to talk about me? Would she look at me in disgust? In December 2019, I was struggling so much under the pressure of a new position and Teacher of the Year responsibilities that I had a relapse. At that time, I came out to my family because I spent the holidays in a rehabilitation facility. My family was blindsided, but thankfully through everything since, they've always stepped forward and believed in my ability to recover. I remember returning from winter break, sitting in a faculty circle. When asked how our breaks were, I immediately fell apart. I had spent my holiday hospitalized, and I couldn't tell a soul in the room where I was or how I was truly feeling. I was so ashamed of who I was. I was so disgusted with myself. I thought I could not tell a single soul about this significant part of my life I have to struggle with daily. I felt so alone. I had not accepted that I was sick. I continued with my sobriety journey, feeling isolated, knowing my family was far away. I hated that when I needed my mother's hug or my sister's hand on my shoulder, all I could get was a phone call. I was able to lean on my then boyfriend, as he was also in recovery and understood the daily work that it took to stay sober. Then COVID-19 came. As the virus reached Kentucky, I assumed we were going to have an extended spring break. I anticipated an excellent opportunity to catch up on work. I hoped to build further on my relationship, get some well-needed rest, and have an excuse to order food from local restaurants. But quickly, the truth was becoming apparent. This quarantine was not going to end anytime soon. I began missing my old life. The quarantine shattered my routine that was so vital to recovery. This new normal that was encroaching upon us became terrifying as the many restrictions further physically removed him and me from our support systems. We entered grocery stores, fearing infection to get necessities, scrambling to get essential items such as toilet paper. Life became increasingly depressing for the two of us, and he relapsed. He struggled. He cried tears of shame and guilt, tears that I had experienced so often. One morning, he said he would run out to the gas station and he would come right back, but he never did. I went looking for him at his apartment and knocked. No answer. I called his phone. I could hear it ring, but he didn't answer. I banged on the door. I yelled, but no response. I grabbed the fire extinguisher to beat his door down. A neighbor called the police on me, and when they arrived and got the apartment door open, I heard, "There's a dead male." Everything was a blur until the coroner let me in. I saw him lifeless, and there went my sobriety. At that moment, I thought my dreams of a future vanished. Dreams of a marriage and a family just gone. I was utterly devastated and horrified. So I'm pausing here again in the middle of this mentor text just to kind of give a sample of like what my free writing workshop was like. And again, this is where I would have prompted the participants to let's pause, let's check in emotionally, right? If we're starting to feel that we're getting triggered, like let's do some self-soothing exercises. Are we needing to do some breath work? Are we needing to do some other type of grounding exercise? Like I had people say, Jessica, how can you talk about this? I think for me, I've had to share this story of loss so many times. It hits me, but it's almost like I just go through it, right? And like I feel it and I pause. And so I always take this moment to check in with whoever's listening or watching, just for the simple fact that, again, I've been working through this for 2 years very consciously, almost 3 years at this point with this loss. But for someone who's listening, right, like that's why I put the content warning, because you might suddenly hear this and be totally thrown off because this is suddenly reminding you of something you went through. So if you're watching this on the replay, again, pause, take a deep breath, right? sit with yourself, go journal, take a break, stretch, or just stop watching the video, right? But again, when we're in my workshop, and again, in this 6-week program that I'm getting ready to gear up on Sunday, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be really mindful of moments that we need to pause, take care of ourselves, and then pick back up and keep going forward. So with that being said, the other thing, just a reminder as you're listening, what are the parts of your story that you're comfortable with sharing? Keep note of that. What are the things that you're feeling from what you're seeing me write or share that I wrote that you feel like you'd be uncomfortable with sharing? And let's dig into that discomfort. Where is that coming from? Is that a discomfort that needs to be challenged in order for you to grow? With that being said, I'm going to continue with reading. If you're with me now, I see is that Kenny? I think that's Kenny who's here live. Hello. And then obviously I know people will watch this on a playback, so I'm going to keep going. And again, if you're watching this also, the 6-week program is starting on Sunday. Thanks, Kenny. I really appreciate that. But yeah, so if you want to join the class starts for 6 weeks starting on Sunday. Register at bottomlesstosober.com. The reduced price is $99 for 6 weeks of writing instruction, including a one-to-one with me on your writing. And then the price goes up starting tomorrow. So with that, let me go back to writing. But thanks, Kenny. I appreciate that. All right. Back to the point of the loss, right? So the neighbor called the police on me. And when they arrived and got the apartment door open, I heard, "There is a dead male." Everything was a blur until the coroner came in. Everything was a blur until the coroner let me in. I saw him lifeless, and there went my sobriety. At that moment, I thought my dreams of a future vanished. Dreams of a marriage and family just gone. I was utterly devastated and horrified. I couldn't have my family rush over to help me because of COVID-19's travel restrictions at that time. And since then, I had gone back and forth fighting the battle of my addiction to alcohol. Since the spring, remember I wrote this December of 2020, I got sober at the end of November. Since the spring, I've experienced 7 hospitalizations with stays from 3 up to 35 days. My summer of 2020 was a complete blurred wreck that almost killed me, and I would have accepted that fate at that time. However, each time I fell, I was able to get back up with other support. And as the fog cleared, I tried my best to move forward. Yes, the grief was too much and I would fall again. And thankfully, COVID-19 did allow for remote work, so I decided to leave Louisville and go stay with my family in Florida. I sought their help because I could no longer try to do this recovery work daily on my own. Ever since, I've started to feel better. I've had more solid days than rocky ones, but each time schools were possibly gearing up to open and go back to in-person classes, I noticed that panic filled me. The idea of being forced to return to Louisville for work permanently triggered my trauma. I tried once to go back and it was a failed experiment. I knew that I narrowly escaped death over the summer. Going back to Louisville would have set me up to die by prioritizing my career. So I finally decided, to truly embrace my recovery. I decided to let go of this beautiful thing called teaching, and that has consumed every part of my being, and resigned. My last day was December 4th. Do I love Louisville? Absolutely. Is it a place full of trauma for me? Yes. Did I ever think my 13th career teaching would end like this? No. However, from darkness comes light. Each day as I go through this process of choosing life, of choosing to stay sober just for another day, I know I made the best decision ever. My dream, and remember I wrote this back in December 2020 if you're listening or just joining on, my dream is to attain long-term sobriety, and I believe one day I will. But just for today, I choose to live in recovery until I fall asleep. I will fight my alcoholism daily. I no longer live in fear of anyone trying to out me. There were times this year I felt ready to die, but here I stand to tell my story of choosing to live. I will live a good life. I will have a family. I will find peace and still be of service to others, just not in the way I had planned. My mother has a saying in Spanish, uno pone y Dios dispone, meaning that we might have one plan, but God has another plan. And I accept that as my journey. Today, I stand proud of who I am and embrace all parts of me. My recovery will no longer be my secret. Instead, it's my story to tell others that we all deserve a fighting chance at a good life, no matter how many times giving up feels like it's the only way out. So I hope and pray, and this is me writing back in December of 2020, I hope and pray if anyone gets anything out of my story, it's the following. 1, death is never a solution to any problem we have, no matter how overwhelming it may feel. 2, always lean on others for help. We don't have to suffer in life alone. 3, recovery is possible if you fall down 9 times. If you fall 8 times, get up 9. Fight for your life. You're worth it. And the last thing that I wrote, which I would adjust, but again, this is how I wrote it back then. I said, addiction, regardless of the substance, is a disease, period. No one judges a person with diabetes. Don't let anyone devalue you for your condition. In 2023, as I'm saying this, right, I have different beliefs on that, just based on a lot more research that I've done on my own. However, at the time when I barely had a couple days of recovery, that was my belief, that I did firmly believe that it was just a disease. I do think it's more complex and much more nuanced than just that. So anyway, this is where I would have prompted my participants. Again, let's pause. Let's take a moment to debrief or really check in with ourselves. Do we need to do a quick breathing exercise? Do we need to do some other grounding activity? And then we would go into the conversation. Looking at what I wrote and what I shared, what are parts of your story that resonated with this, whether or not you're someone who has an alcohol problem, right? Like, pain is a common human condition. So what are some things that resonated with you? What are some things that you feel like you would be comfortable writing about potentially, or writing out fully? And then what are still some things that you're feeling uncomfortable with? What are some things that are still feeling difficult for you, and why? And let's dig into that discomfort. So we would basically go through and have that conversation. We would be identifying some feelings that would be coming up for people based off of this conversation. What's the story in your mind? What's the story that you're telling yourself about these feelings? And then what can we say to ourselves to counter that, to help encourage you and nourish you and help push you towards writing and going through that healing process through writing. So I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me on this live or the playback, because most of you are going to watch this on the playback. Again, my writing class is starting on Sunday, the 12th of March at 2 p.m. Eastern time, from 2 to 3, and that is for 6 weeks. Right now, the reduced price, it's $99 for the rest of the day. And then after tomorrow, it'll go up. But again, that was a sample of the writing. This is going to go and stay on my Instagram profile, so you can go back and look at it. But again, 6 weeks worth of writing. It's going to be a small class. I'm capping it at 15, and I've got about 5 people or so signed up right now. So it's going to be a nice and intimate group, but just really an opportunity to challenge yourself in a really nourishing and supportive, loving environment. And like I said, I'll meet with you one-on-one too, and give you feedback on your writing to help support that. So if you have any questions, you can hit me up. But again, find this information and sign up at bottomlesstosober.com. You all stay blessed.